What if a baby who never smiled for anyone suddenly kissed the one person everyone looked down on? He was the son of a millionaire, a child who had kicked, screamed, and punched every nanny that came near him. No one could hold him. No one could calm him. Not even his father's money could buy peace in that mansion. Every night, the sound of his cries echoed through the halls like a wound that refused to heal. Then one morning, the cleaning maid, a quiet black woman named Jessica, walked in holding a mop and a small bucket. She was never meant to go near the baby. She was just there to clean the floors and leave before the rich family woke up. But when the baby's cries filled the room again, she did something no one dared to do. She went closer. Everyone expected another scream, another kick, maybe another bruise. But instead, the baby reached for her, touched her cheek, and kissed her softly before closing his eyes to sleep. That single kiss changed everything. In that moment, the house froze. His grandmother gasped. The billionaire father stood speechless. And in that quiet shock, a secret that had been buried deep inside that mansion began to rise. Because that simple act of love, from a child to the one woman they all looked down on, would soon uncover the ugliest truth in their world. And nothing in Texas would ever be the same again. The Turner Mansion stood on the edge of Austin, tall and proud, with walls that shined but hearts that didn't. Behind every polished marble floor and golden chandelier was a silence that made the air heavy. The house had everything money could buy, yet no one inside seemed happy. At the center of it all was Charles Turner, a man whose name opened doors across Texas. But inside his own home, he felt powerless. Since his wife's death, peace had vanished. His little boy, Samuel, who once laughed at bedtime stories, now screamed at the sight of strangers. Every nanny that tried to care for him was met with tiny fists and sharp cries. Charles had spent thousands on specialists, therapy sessions, and private nurses, but nothing worked. That morning, his mother Margaret was once again raising her voice in the grand living room. "Charles," she said sharply, "this can't continue. That child needs discipline, not sympathy. Fire the new nanny before the neighbors hear about this mess." Charles rubbed his temples and sighed. He was tired, not just of the noise, but of the emptiness that lived in the house. "Mother," he said quietly, "you don't understand. He's just a child. He's hurting." "Hurting?" she scoffed. "He's spoiled. He throws food, breaks toys, and attacks every nanny we hire. What that boy needs is control, not pity." Before Charles could answer, the sound of Samuel's cries filled the hall again. It wasn't just crying. It was pain, the kind that came from deep inside. Margaret covered her ears in frustration. "There it goes again," she said. "Do something, Charles." He stood up and hurried toward the sound, his footsteps echoing down the marble corridor. The crying led him to the playroom, where the nanny stood at the door, trembling. Her uniform was torn, her cheek red from where the baby's hand had struck her. "I'm sorry, sir," she said between tears. "I can't do this anymore. He won't stop. He hates me." Charles tried to speak, but the woman had already gathered her things and left. The door closed behind her, leaving him alone with the sound of his son's screams. He walked slowly toward the crib. "Samuel," he whispered, "it's okay. Daddy's here." But the baby kicked, screamed, and threw his toy at the wall. Charles felt his throat tighten. He would give up every dollar he had just to see his son smile again. As he leaned against the crib, trying not to break down, a quiet voice spoke behind him. "Sir, should I come back later?" Charles turned. Standing at the doorway was Jessica, holding her mop and bucket. Her uniform was clean but simple, her hair tied neatly back. She was the new night maid, just there to clean the floor. "No," Charles said softly. "You can finish. He'll stop soon." Jessica hesitated, looking at the small boy crying in his crib. Something in his voice cut through her heart. It wasn't anger, it was fear. "If you don't mind, sir," she said gently, "may I try something?" Charles blinked, unsure what she meant. "You? You're not trained for this." "I know," Jessica said, her tone calm. "But I know what pain sounds like." Before he could stop her, she walked closer. Each step was slow, her voice low and soft, the way a mother hums to a baby in the dark. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered. "It's okay. You're safe." To Charles's shock, Samuel stopped crying for a moment. He blinked up at Jessica, confused but calm. She smiled, not afraid of his little fists, and slowly lifted him into her arms. Everyone in the house froze. Margaret appeared at the door, gasping, "What is she doing?" But before anyone could say a word, the baby laid his head on Jessica's chest. His little hand reached for her face, and then, with quiet innocence, he kissed her cheek. The entire room went still. Charles stared, his mouth slightly open. He's never done that before." Jessica's eyes softened as she rocked the baby gently. "Children know who means them well, sir. They can feel it." Margaret's face twisted with anger. "Put him down," she demanded. "You'll contaminate him with your—" "Mother," Charles said firmly, his voice shaking. "Stop." For the first time, he felt something shift in his heart. This woman, the one everyone ignored, had done in seconds what money couldn't buy. Jessica tried to hand Samuel back, but the boy clung tighter, refusing to let go. His small hands gripped her uniform as if afraid she would disappear. The silence in the room was heavy. Then Dr. Harris, the family pediatrician who had just arrived, spoke quietly. "I've never seen this reaction before," he said. "It's as if he recognizes something in her. Something familiar, something safe." Jessica lowered her eyes. She didn't know why the baby trusted her, but she felt it too. A strange connection, like two hearts remembering each other. Charles looked at her, confused and amazed. "Jessica," he said slowly, "how did you do that?" "I didn't do anything special, sir," she said softly. "Sometimes love doesn't need permission." For the first time in months, the mansion fell silent. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows. Inside, the baby slept peacefully in the arms of the woman everyone looked down on. And none of them knew that this quiet moment was only the beginning of something much deeper, something that would soon tear open secrets the Turner family had tried to hide for years. The house that morning felt different. For the first time in months, the air was calm, and the sound that used to echo through every hallway, Samuel's endless crying, was gone. The maids whispered quietly among themselves, afraid to break the strange peace that had settled over the mansion. Jessica sat in the nursery chair with the baby resting against her chest, his tiny hands clutching her blouse. The warmth of his breath brushed against her skin as he slept deeply, something everyone said was impossible. She looked down at him, her heart soft but heavy. She wasn't supposed to be holding him. She was supposed to be cleaning floors. When the door creaked open, Jessica looked up. Charles Turner stood there, still in his gray suit from the night before. His eyes were tired, his hair slightly unkempt, but there was something different about him, something uncertain, something searching. "He's been asleep for almost 2 hours," Jessica said softly, afraid her voice might wake the child. Charles stepped inside, staring at his son like he was seeing a miracle. "2 hours?" he whispered. "He hasn't slept that long since." He stopped. His voice broke on the memory of his late wife, and the room fell silent again. Jessica stood, gently transferring Samuel to his crib. The baby stirred but didn't cry. Charles watched, still in disbelief. "How did you do that?" he asked quietly. Jessica shrugged. "I didn't do anything, sir. I just listened to him. Sometimes children don't need much, just someone who sees them." Her words sank into him like rain on dry ground. For months, He had watched expensive specialists come and go, all of them treating Samuel like a project. But this woman, with nothing but patience and care, had done what no one could. The door opened again. Margaret Turner entered, her heels tapping against the floor like warnings. She froze when she saw Jessica standing near the crib. "What is she still doing here?" she asked coldly. "Charles, I told you this woman should not be anywhere near the baby." "Mother," Charles said calmly, "look at him. He's fine." Margaret folded her arms, her pearl bracelet clinking softly. "Fine? You think this is fine? She's just a maid, Charles. You're letting a cleaning woman play mother to your son. What will people say?" Jessica lowered her gaze, trying to stay silent, but Margaret's voice grew sharper. "Put that baby down and leave before I call security." "Mother," Charles said again, louder this time. "Enough." His voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. Margaret blinked, taken aback, but she didn't back down. "You don't understand the kind of people you're letting into this house, Charles. She's not like us." Jessica kept her voice calm. "You're right, ma'am," she said quietly. "I'm not like you. I don't have money, I don't wear pearls, and I don't belong to any country clubs, but I do care for that child." Margaret's lips tightened into a thin line. "Caring isn't enough." Jessica nodded. "Maybe not, but love is." The words hung in the air. Charles looked from his mother to Jessica, and for the first time he didn't know which world he belonged to, the polished one built on power, or the quiet one that had just brought peace to his home. Before anyone could speak again, Dr. Harris entered the room with a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Turner," he said politely, "I came to check on Samuel after yesterday's episode." When he saw the baby sleeping soundly, he stopped mid-step. "I don't believe this," he murmured. "He's perfectly relaxed. His breathing is steady, no signs of distress." Margaret forced a laugh. "Oh, doctor, you're exaggerating. The baby simply tired himself out." Dr. Harris shook his head. "No, ma'am, this is different. His pulse, his posture, this is what emotional safety looks like." Jessica said nothing. She simply adjusted Samuel's blanket. Dr. Harris gave her a small smile, one that said more than words. Charles exhaled slowly. "Doctor, what do you think is happening here?" "I think your son has finally connected with someone," Dr. Harris replied. "And if you ask me, that's something you shouldn't interfere with." Margaret's face hardened. "Are you suggesting that this maid should stay?" "I'm suggesting," Dr. Harris said firmly, "that whatever she's doing is helping him. Sometimes healing doesn't come from status, it comes from spirit." Charles looked at Jessica again. "Would you stay for a few more days?" Margaret gasped. "Charles, no." "It's just a trial," he interrupted. "If he continues improving, we'll discuss next steps." Jessica hesitated. "Sir, I don't want to cause trouble. I can leave once he wakes." Charles shook his head. "No. Stay." The room went silent again, filled only by the faint hum of the air conditioner and the soft breathing of the sleeping child. Margaret turned sharply and walked out, her heels echoing her fury down the hall. Later that evening, as the sky dimmed over the wide Texas hills, Jessica walked through the quiet mansion. She passed rooms filled with gold-framed portraits, spotless furniture, and cold beauty. Everything looked perfect, yet nothing felt alive. She found herself outside on the terrace, watching the sunset. The orange glow brushed against her face as she thought of her mother back in Houston. The long shifts, the sacrifices, the strength it took to survive. Her mother's words echoed in her heart. "Baby, they'll never see you for what you're worth, but don't you ever forget who you are." The sound of footsteps pulled her back. Charles stood beside her, hands in his pockets. For a moment, they just looked at the fading sun. "I don't know how to thank you," he said finally. "I thought I was losing him." Jessica smiled softly. You were never losing him, sir. You were just trying too hard to fix what didn't need fixing. What do you mean? Samuel doesn't need perfection, she said. He needs peace. He needs someone who isn't afraid of his pain. Charles looked at her carefully, seeing the quiet strength in her eyes. You speak like someone who's seen a lot. Jessica's voice lowered. I have, sir. Life teaches you more than books ever can. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night breeze moved gently between them, carrying the faint sound of Samuel's laughter from inside, a sound that made both of them turn in disbelief. The baby was laughing. Charles smiled for the first time in months. You hear that? He said quietly. Jessica nodded, her heart tightening. Yes, sir. I hear hope. Inside that mansion, something had begun to change, something small but powerful. Yet Jessica didn't know that behind the closed doors upstairs, Margaret was already making calls. Her voice low, her words sharp. I want a full background check on that maid, she said into the phone. Everything. Where she's from, who she's been with, and what she's hiding. Because while Jessica had just brought peace into the mansion, Margaret was already planning to destroy it. Morning came softly over the Turner mansion. The sunlight slipped through the long white curtains, touching the marble floors with a faint glow. The house that used to echo with cries now felt calm. For the first time in months, the smell of breakfast filled the air without the sound of chaos. Jessica moved quietly through the kitchen, her uniform neat, her hair tied back. She was still getting used to the feeling of peace inside that house. Each time she passed Samuel's nursery, she peeked in, almost afraid it was all a dream. But there he was, smiling, his little hands playing with the toy she gave him the night before. Dr. Harris had stopped by early that morning and couldn't hide his amazement. He's improving faster than I imagined, he said. His sleep pattern, his reactions, everything is changing. Charles stood beside him, nodding with a faint smile. It's her, he said softly, glancing toward Jessica, who was arranging Samuel's breakfast. She did this. Jessica looked up, a little embarrassed. It's not me, sir. It's him. He just needed to be heard. But not everyone in the house shared that peace. Upstairs, behind closed doors, Margaret Turner was pacing her room, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Yes, she whispered to the person on the other end. I want every detail. Her past jobs, her education, her family, everything. She's hiding something, I know it. Her reflection in the mirror showed the same cold determination that had built her reputation in Austin's elite circles. She wasn't used to losing control, especially not to someone she considered beneath her. Find something I can use, she said before ending the call. That afternoon, Charles had to leave for a business meeting downtown. Before leaving, he stopped by the nursery where Jessica sat, reading a story to Samuel. The baby laughed softly, clapping his tiny hands. Charles stood at the door, smiling. You're good with him, he said gently. Jessica turned, startled. Oh, I didn't see you there, sir. He stepped inside, his tone warm but careful. You don't have to be so formal all the time. You can call me Charles. She hesitated. I appreciate that, sir, but I'd rather keep it respectful. He nodded. Fair enough. He looked at Samuel, then back at her. I don't know what this house would be like right now without you. Jessica smiled softly. You don't have to thank me. I'm just doing what I was hired to do. But they both knew it was more than that. There was something unspoken in the air, a quiet gratitude that words couldn't describe. After Charles left, the house fell silent again. Jessica used the time to tidy up the nursery and prepare lunch for Samuel. But as she passed the hallway, she heard faint whispers coming from the study. She paused, her hand tightening around the tray she was holding. Through the half-open door, she saw Linda, Charles's sister-in-law, standing beside Margaret. She's too comfortable here, Linda said, her voice low but sharp. Mother, if you keep letting her stay, soon she'll have him completely wrapped around her finger. Margaret's eyes narrowed. I won't let that happen. I've already called an investigator. We'll see how long her perfect act lasts once the truth comes out. Jessica's chest tightened. She stepped back quietly before they could see her, her heart beating hard. She knew what that meant. They were trying to destroy her, not because she had done something wrong, but because she had done something right. Later that evening, when Samuel fell asleep, Jessica sat by the window in her small room near the servants' quarters. She pulled out her phone and stared at a picture of her mother. The older woman's warm smile gave her strength. "Mama," she whispered, "I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm trying." A soft knock came at the door. It was Dr. Harris. "Jessica, may I come in?" She stood quickly. "Of course, doctor." He stepped inside, his expression serious. "Margaret called me this afternoon. She asked for medical proof that you've been using unapproved methods with Samuel." Jessica frowned. "Unapproved methods? I haven't done anything wrong." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm telling you this. Be careful. They're looking for something to use against you." Jessica nodded slowly. "Thank you for warning me." He hesitated at the door. "For what it's worth, I believe in you. I've seen real change in that boy, and no report will ever take that away." After he left, Jessica sat on her bed, staring into the darkness. She had been through things like this before, people doubting her, questioning her worth, treating her like she didn't belong. But this was different. This time, a child's future was tied to her name. The next morning, the mansion buzzed with visitors. Margaret had called a small family gathering. Jessica wasn't invited, but she could hear the tension from the kitchen. Voices rose and fell in sharp tones. "Charles," Margaret said firmly, "I've received disturbing information about that maid. She's not who she says she is." Jessica froze behind the kitchen door, her hands trembling. "What do you mean?" Charles asked. "According to the investigator," Margaret continued, "she's been hiding her education background. She once worked at a daycare that shut down after an incident with a child." Charles frowned. "What kind of incident?" Margaret smiled thinly. "They claimed it was an accident, but we know how these people lie to protect themselves." Jessica stepped back, her breath catching. It wasn't true. The daycare had closed because the owner fell ill, not because of her. But she knew Margaret wouldn't stop twisting the story. She heard Charles's voice harden. "Mother, that's enough. You're crossing a line." "No, I'm saving you," Margaret snapped. "That woman is dangerous. I won't let her ruin this family." Jessica couldn't listen anymore. She walked out to the backyard, her chest heavy. She stood under the wide Texas sky, staring at the orange clouds drifting above. The sound of the wind brushed against her uniform as she tried to steady herself. "Don't cry," she whispered. "You've faced worse. You can face this too." But deep down, she knew the fight was far from over. That night, as she walked Samuel to his crib, she noticed a small white envelope under her door. Her name was written on it in careful handwriting. She opened it slowly and froze. Inside was a single photo, a picture of her standing outside the daycare years ago. On the back, written in red ink, were the words, "Leave before we destroy you." Jessica stared at it, her hands shaking. Somewhere in that big, quiet house, someone was watching her every move. She looked toward the nursery, where Samuel slept peacefully, and whispered, "I'm not leaving you." Her voice was firm, her heart steady. She knew then that whatever storm was coming, she wouldn't run this time. Because this wasn't just a job anymore, it was something much bigger, something worth fighting for. And as the night deepened over the Turner mansion, a shadow moved outside her window, the first sign that the war inside that house had only just begun. The next morning arrived heavy and tense. Clouds hung over the Turner mansion, the kind that promised rain but refused to fall. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken words. Every maid moved carefully, speaking only in whispers. Everyone could feel it, something was coming. Jessica woke early, her eyes tired from a night with little sleep. The letter still lay folded on her bedside table. She hadn't told anyone about it, not even Charles. Whoever left it knew too much, and she didn't want to risk anything before she understood what she was truly facing. After checking on Samuel and finding him smiling as always, she tried to calm herself. The child was her peace. His laughter reminded her why she couldn't walk away. But every time she looked at the photo with the red writing, her heart grew heavier. Someone in that house wanted her gone, and they were willing to go far to make it happen. Later that morning, she walked into the living room to find Margaret Turner waiting. The older woman sat perfectly still in her cream suit, her diamond brooch glinting under the chandelier. Her smile was thin, cold, practiced. "Good morning, Jessica," she said, her tone sweet but poisonous. "I wanted to speak to you privately." Jessica nodded slowly. "Of course, ma'am." Margaret stood, walking closer, her perfume filling the air. "I heard you received a letter last night." Jessica's chest tightened. "How do you know about that?" "Oh, let's just say this house has a way of keeping secrets from no one," Margaret said with a faint smile. "You should take the advice written in that letter. Leave quietly. It would be better for everyone." Jessica's voice stayed calm, but her hands trembled slightly. "Are you the one who sent it?" Margaret tilted her head. "I don't send warnings, dear. I act on them." For a moment, their eyes locked, a silent battle of strength and pride. Jessica didn't flinch. She had faced humiliation before, but this was different. She wasn't alone anymore. She had Samuel's trust, and for her, that meant more than fear. "I'm not leaving, ma'am," Jessica said firmly. "That little boy needs me, and I'll stay as long as I can help him." Margaret's smile vanished. "You're making a mistake. Women like you always do." She turned sharply and walked away, her heels tapping like thunder on the marble floor. Jessica stood there, breathing deeply. She wanted to cry, but she wouldn't give Margaret the satisfaction. Instead, she went to the kitchen to make Samuel's breakfast. As she stirred his oatmeal, she thought of her mother again, her strength, her voice, her courage. "They'll try to make you small, baby," her mother used to say. "But you're not small. You're enough." When she brought Samuel his breakfast, he smiled and clapped his little hands. He had started to say small words, and each sound felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Say, Mama," Jessica teased gently. Samuel giggled, trying to form the word. "Ma," he said softly, then reached for her hand. Jessica froze, her throat tightening. It wasn't just a sound, it was trust. It was connection. But her moment of joy didn't last. Linda appeared at the doorway, holding her phone with a fake smile. "Aren't you just wonderful?" she said. "Such a natural with him. Almost like you've done this before." Jessica looked up slowly. "I've worked with children for years, ma'am." "Yes, I've read all about that," Linda said, her voice sharp. "In fact, Mother and I did some digging. Quite an interesting past you have, Jessica. That daycare you worked for closed under strange circumstances, didn't it?" Jessica's jaw tightened. "You know very well that place shut down because the owner fell sick. Don't twist things." Linda's smirk widened. "Maybe, maybe not. Either way, Charles deserves to know everything about the person living under his roof, don't you think?" "Tell him whatever you want," Jessica said quietly. "I have nothing to hide." "Oh, we will," Linda said, walking away. Later that afternoon, Charles returned from the city, unaware of what had happened. He was greeted by silence. Margaret and Linda sat in the living room waiting, pretending calm. Jessica stood by the doorway, holding Samuel. "Charles," Margaret began, "we need to talk about the maid." Charles sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Mother, not this again. This is serious," she insisted. "She's been lying about her past." "That's not true," Jessica said firmly. Linda pulled out her phone. "Then explain this," she said, showing Charles a photo, the same daycare picture that was in Jessica's letter. Charles frowned. "Where did you get that?" "It doesn't matter," Margaret said. "She's hiding something. You can't risk your son's safety." Jessica's voice broke slightly as she spoke. "Mr. Turner, please. That daycare was a good place. We took care of those children like they were ours. It closed because the owner got sick, not because of me." Charles looked at her, searching her face. There was no guilt in her eyes, only pain. Margaret pressed on. "Charles, you're being blinded. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. Don't forget who you are." He turned slowly toward his mother. "Maybe that's the problem, Mother. Maybe I've been too much like who you wanted me to be." Margaret froze, stunned. Charles continued, his voice calm but heavy. "All my life, you taught me to measure people by their background, their money, their skin. But look at my son. He's happy because someone you judged unworthy gave him love. You want me to fire the only person who's given him peace." Linda stepped in. "Charles, you don't understand. She's manipulating you." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "I'm not manipulating anyone. I just care about your child. That's all I've ever done." Dr. Harris, who had come for a scheduled visit, stood quietly until now. "If I may speak," he said firmly, "I have never seen such improvement in Samuel. Jessica's care has done what months of expensive therapy couldn't. If you remove her, that boy will regress." The room fell silent. Charles looked at each of them before speaking. "Jessica stays. That's final." Margaret's face turned pale with anger. Linda stormed out. Jessica stood there holding Samuel, her heart racing. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. For the first time, someone had stood up for her, someone powerful. After everyone left the room, Charles turned to her. "Jessica, I'm sorry you had to go through that." She smiled weakly. "You don't have to apologize, sir. I've heard worse before. I'm just grateful for the chance to be here." He nodded. "You've earned more than that. You've earned our trust." That night, as the rain finally began to fall outside, Jessica stood by Samuel's crib, watching him sleep peacefully. She whispered softly, "You're safe now, little one." But in the dark hallway beyond the nursery door, Margaret stood watching quietly, her face hard. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You might have won today, Jessica, but I'm not done yet." Lightning flashed across the window, lighting the mansion for only a second, and then everything fell into darkness again. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one still building inside those walls. Thunder rolled across the Texas sky as heavy rain poured down on the Turner mansion. The wind howled through the trees, slamming branches against the windows. Inside, lights flickered while the storm raged outside. But it wasn't just the weather that carried tension. Something deeper was brewing inside those walls, something that would decide everything. Jessica sat in her small room near the nursery, watching the candle flicker on her desk. Her heart felt heavy. She had finally gained Charles's trust, and Samuel's laughter had filled the house again, but she knew Margaret wouldn't stop. The older woman's silence that evening had been more frightening than her words. Suddenly, Jessica's phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Harris. "Be careful. I overheard something. They're planning something tonight." Her chest tightened. She grabbed her robe and hurried down the hall. The house was dim, most of the staff asleep, but voices echoed faintly from the study, Margaret's sharp tone and Linda's anxious whisper. Jessica stopped by the doorway and listened. "He's blinded by her," Margaret said, her voice trembling with fury. "That maid has turned my son against me." Linda replied nervously, Maybe it's too late, Mother. After what happened today, Charles won't listen. Then we'll make him listen, Margaret snapped. I have something that will end this once and for all. By tomorrow, she'll be gone. Jessica leaned closer, her pulse quickening. Margaret continued. I told the investigator to send that file directly to Child Services. They'll come for her first thing in the morning. Once they see the report, she won't step foot in this house again. Linda gasped. But what about Samuel? Margaret's tone was cold. He'll forget her soon enough. Jessica stepped back, her breath shaking. They were planning to destroy her reputation completely, not just fire her, but ruin her. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to run. Not again. Not this time. She hurried back to her room, grabbed her phone, and called Dr. Harris. They're sending fake files to Child Services, she whispered. Then we stop them, he said. I'll come over. Don't let anyone near that baby until I arrive. Jessica hung up and hurried to Samuel's nursery. The storm outside grew louder, lightning flashing through the window as she stood over the sleeping child. She brushed a gentle hand over his forehead. I won't let them take you, she whispered. Moments later, the nursery door burst open. Margaret stood there, holding a folder in one hand and fury in her eyes. So it's true, she hissed. You've been eavesdropping, haven't you? Jessica straightened. I know what you're doing. You're lying to destroy me. Margaret stepped closer, her voice sharp. You don't belong here. This house isn't yours, this child isn't yours, and that kindness you pretend to have, it's just your way of climbing up. Women like you always want more. Jessica shook her head slowly. You're wrong. I never wanted anything but peace for this child. You can keep your money, your pride, and your mansion, but you can't take away what he feels. You saw it yourself. He's not afraid of me. He loves me. Enough, Margaret shouted. Pack your things and leave before I make one call that ends your life in this city. Before Jessica could answer, another voice came from behind them. You won't make that call. They both turned. Charles Turner stood at the door, soaked from the rain, his face dark with disbelief. I heard everything, he said quietly. Margaret froze. Charles, I was only protecting you. Protecting me? He interrupted, his tone low and cold. You hired people to lie about her. You tried to involve Child Services, and you call that protection. Linda appeared behind Margaret, pale and trembling. Charles, please. It wasn't my idea. I don't care whose idea it was, Charles said firmly. It ends tonight. The thunder outside shook the windows, but inside, it was silence that roared. Charles turned to Jessica. I'm sorry you had to go through this, he said softly. You didn't deserve any of it. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. I just wanted to help him, sir. That's all I ever wanted. I know, he said, and you did, more than anyone ever could. Margaret's voice cracked. Charles, she's manipulating you. Look at her. She's standing there pretending to be innocent. Charles faced her fully. Mother, I've watched that woman care for my son with more love than I've seen in this house in years. You see her color, her uniform, her background, but I see her heart. Margaret's lips trembled, but she had no words. Just then, Dr. Harris arrived, dripping from the rain, holding a brown envelope. Mr. Turner, he said, breathing heavily, the investigator you hired sent me this by mistake. It's proof the reports against Jessica were fabricated. They paid someone to rewrite her record. Charles took the papers, scanning them quickly, his jaw tightened. So it's true, he muttered. Mother, you went this far? Margaret's face crumbled. I did it for you, she whispered. No, he said quietly. You did it for control. The thunder outside softened into rain. The storm was passing, but inside, everything was still. Jessica stood silently, holding Samuel as he stirred in her arms. The little boy opened his eyes and reached for Charles. The sight melted the tension in the room. Charles stepped closer and smiled softly. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "You're safe now." Margaret turned away, tears filling her eyes. For the first time, her pride broke. "I only wanted to protect this family," she said weakly. "Then start by telling the truth," Charles replied. Margaret nodded slowly, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry. It wasn't much, but it was a start." Days later, peace returned to the mansion. The false reports were cleared, the investigator arrested, and the staff no longer whispered in fear. Jessica was officially named Samuel's permanent caregiver, and Charles made her part of the Turner Foundation, helping children across Texas who suffered emotional trauma. Dr. Harris joined as a consultant, and even Linda, now remorseful, began to volunteer quietly at a local children's home. Margaret stayed silent for a long time, but she eventually visited Jessica one morning and left a simple note that read, "You were right. He needed love, not control." Months passed, and Samuel's laughter became the sound that filled every corner of the house. He was talking, smiling, and running through the garden with Jessica by his side. One evening, Charles stood at the doorway watching them. "You changed everything," he said softly. Jessica smiled. "He changed me first." Charles nodded slowly. "You know, that day he kissed you, I thought it was just a moment. But I was wrong. It was the beginning of everything good that came after." Jessica looked down at Samuel, who was now chasing butterflies across the grass. "Sometimes the smallest acts show us what love really is," she said. "And it doesn't matter who it comes from." The sun began to set behind the hills, painting the Texas sky in gold and red. The storm had passed, but its lessons remained that kindness could do what money never could, that love could break walls built by pride, and that sometimes miracles come quietly, wearing a maid's uniform and holding a child who finally found peace. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that love has no color, no class, and no price. Sometimes the people the world looks down on are the ones sent to heal what money and pride cannot. Jessica walked into that mansion as a maid, but she became the heart that brought peace back to a broken home. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes that kindness still changes lives. Before you go, tell us in the comments what part of this story moved you the most, what lesson you learned, and where you're watching from tonight. Your words inspire us to bring you more emotional stories filled with hope and truth.